Hello, everyone. Welcome to From Open and Citizen Science to Activism, Roles for Academic Staff. This is an outreach and community event of the EU-funded INOS Project. I'm Michael Peter Edson, MP Edson on Twitter or at usingdata.com, and I'll be your moderator for today. Today, we have a great lineup of 5 speakers who will each talk to you about their own work across a range of citizen science, activism, and protest. We're gathering today under Web2Learn's Code of Conduct, very standard stuff. If you have any questions or concerns about conduct in today's webinar, today's seminar, please reach out to Katerina or myself via chat. So make yourself comfortable as we begin with our first speaker, Katerina Zourou, who will give you an overview of the project and today's event. Katerina Zourou is head of Web2Learn, a digital education company located in Greece. She's also a senior researcher in technology enhanced learning, collaborative learning, digital social participation, and forms of active citizenship to tackle societal challenges. She's one of the initiators of the INOS Project that hosts today's webinar. Katerina, the floor is yours. Don't forget to unmute. There you go.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for accepting to act as a moderator in what we believe it will be a very thought-provoking event. I would like to invite you to a journey that today's webinar will be. A journey allowing us to challenge stereotypes, to openly discuss types of activism and their place in academia. Above all, we want this webinar to be an opportunity to discuss forms of activism as a demonstration of citizen engagement. To do so, we will highlight open and citizen science as a promising, outstanding, well-established constellation of citizen engagement forms in science. Definitely, we need a wider audience in this discussion of citizen engagement at large. In the context of climate change, social injustice, biodiversity loss, at a challenging moment for planetary health, which is also a topic of the EXA 2022 conference, science communication and advocacy by academic and research staff may not be sufficient to serve change in these emergency conditions. My name is Katerina Zourou. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the INOS partnership in today's webinar. This is a first of a series of events in which we plan to discuss identities, roles, attitudes of academics in addressing societal challenges. The INOS project, in short, is a constellation of efforts from 6 partners. Aalborg University was the coordinator, University of Bordeaux, Liber, University of Oulu, Tallinn University, and Web2Learn. Its purpose is to bridge open and citizen science inside academia with society. Today's webinar now is about exchanging forms of social action which is undertaken by contemporary academic staff. The purpose is to see whether we can have some change in the patterns of social and environmental justice in collaboration with citizen communities. Also, we would like to question the role of contemporary researchers in action taking and in the translation of their scholarly findings into real social action. Academic activism, okay, fine. What does this mean? The social relevance of academics comes to mind, of course. We talk about science and society, science with and for society in Horizon projects, whereas the 2 terms have 4 letters in common. It seems there are convergence, but also divergence in science serving society. Some of us say that it's a sensitive role in academia to be an activist, academia that has established well-defined rules, norms, the well-known vertical hierarchy, power relations, so also affecting the academic job market, which is at stake. So I would like to challenge today's audience in talking openly about these dimensions of scholarly identities and activism. What I would claim today is that activism in academia has been taking several forms, and I will be focusing on open and citizen science. Open science, I believe, belongs to the legacy for a better world. I could call it, perhaps I'm too idealist in saying so, but there's a very big number of academic and research staff, especially in Europe, and many outstanding EU projects and efforts on open science. Here you see the dimensions of open science. We have started also at the very beginning of the 20th century. Also, citizen science for me is a kind of advocacy and goes very well in the direction of activism for a better world, which is brand not new at all. Citizen science have started in the 19th century with observations around them. So citizen science is a very widespread concept with citizen observatories. We have two experts in citizen observatories, Luigi and Jaume today. Citizen science project of several forms, such as field observations, of course, but also hackathons, maker spaces, fab labs, 48-hour sprints, etc. So my point is that open and citizen science, because they serve a better world, can serve also in, can continue in this continuum of engagement and also activism also in the context of climate emergency and big social injustice. And so examples of non-violent civil disobedience are many in the open and citizen science world, and that webinar could be an opportunity to bridge with other forms of activism. Some open questions now about citizen science and activism. What is the power of citizen science data? Up to which point of action taking we can go and which form they can take? Collecting observations, collecting citizen science data is cool, but when it comes to action taking by universities, where are we? Where do we stand in terms of non-violent civil disobedience? Data collection, citizen observations also reveal a different understanding of empowerment and identity inside and outside university. This is also something we should discuss. And also, this is a more overarching question of today's webinar: how far the concept of science with and for society can bring us in terms of real action and real change. This is, as I said, this is a first of a series of events and exchange opportunities with you. We plan to organize a workshop on this theme by late August, and there's a special issue on digital activism and learning transformations coming up. Thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to listening to the other speakers.
Thank you, Katerina. Let me introduce our next speaker, Jaume. Is a researcher of the Institute of Marine Sciences in Barcelona. During the last 10 years, his research has been focused on participatory systems to develop citizen science projects. Currently, he coordinates 2 European projects, the Open Science Cloud, EOSC, and MINKE, M-I-N-K-E, that connects citizen science communities with ocean observing systems. He's also a member of the board of directors of the European Citizen Science Association, the ECSA. Jaume, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, just a short detail. I'm not coordinating the EOS, the European Open Science Cloud. It's much larger infrastructure. I'm connecting the citizens observatories in connection with the European Open Science Cloud. You know, now just very short clarification. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here. I will address a complementary talk related to Luigi. Luigi was very general. I will very focus on a particular example, just to give, well, a kind of feeling on how we can translate and how can we transform this idea of citizen science connected to activism. And I will do it in a particular case of urban coast, because urban cities, the coast of urban cities, it's an environment with a lot of controversy, because there are many views on how humans are exploiting this, and part of need to be protected or not, or at least changing the uses of these areas. And for this we have a urban coast monitoring system, because we think we thought it was the first step. So the first step, as Luigi was mentioned, this idea of critical mass. If we want to change things, we need to create communities related to that particular topic. So we started promoting this idea of marine community, and this marine, at the first stage, marine observing community. And to achieve that, we identified two major challenges. One, it was the knowledge barriers. So when people say, we like to participate, we will find that many of them will have many barriers in terms of knowledge. And the other is the access of the environment. What does it mean, this idea of knowledge barriers? If I show you, this is a collection of pictures of the type of organisms you may find whenever you snorkel in general in the coast. And you can see, maybe you say, I like very much to contribute. Now I have my own underwater camera. Before it was really expensive. Now it's achievable, so it's affordable to have your own underwater camera, and you can take many pictures like these ones that we show here in the screen. And of course, as I put you an example, there are only 3 that corresponds to algae. The rest of them are animals, but are not that kind of animals we used to have or to see. We are very much unfamiliar with this. So many people say, well, I took a picture and I have no idea if this is an animal, an algae, or what else is this. But I would like to contribute. How can I contribute in this situation in which I'm not familiar with those organisms? And that's why it's becoming important for us, to design citizens observatories that allow people participating. And I can give you that particular example, how to overcome knowledge barriers. The idea in that case is that we facilitate what we call a service. It's called collaborative identification. So whenever you take a picture, maybe you have no idea of what you are observing, but don't worry, you can upload that picture, and the only we need is where it has been taken and when. And there is then the possibility that part of the people, some of them have more knowledge than the other ones. So there is a kind of discussion, open discussion, and in which people can say, look, we think it's that organism. The other say, no, we think it's that the other one. And there is an internal discussions. But this allows an algorithm that provide, in many cases, the final good identification. And with this in mind, we start engaging many people. The other problem is the access, because it's not a familiar environment. Usually you need a kind of the particular dress. Also you need a mask. Also you need, in some cases, well, in those cases, underwater cameras, maybe you don't have, or you cannot afford all of those. And also you need the local knowledge. Whenever there is, weather, depending on the weather, there should be someone that said, no, don't go to that beach now, because it's, you will not see anything, because, for example, the water is so turbid because of the current of the weather situation. It's much better to go to the other one. And with this we identify another role in citizen science, what we call enablers. People, the enabling community are that one that can help the rest of the people to practice this citizen science activity. In this particular case, it was this SME. It's a small SME that it's guided by 2 girls that she decided to offer snorkeling guiding tours in the beaches of Barcelona, which was something, that in the past it was not so common, particularly because people thought that in Barcelona, the only thing you can do is swim, because you only will have sun and water, nothing else. Because no, as they are so artificial, and in fact, those beaches are very artificial. They changed it completely after the Olympic Games in 1992. So people at the beginning, they consider, no, you're wasting your time trying to do snorkeling here, and it's not. And we were able to demonstrate this because we created, with this type of collaboration, the first participatory guide in around the beaches in Barcelona. And you can see the different communities involved. Obviously, we had the academic community that are represented by ourselves. I mean, as a research center, we provide the knowledge, for example, to identify those organisms that were really difficult for them. Also, there is the enabling community, in that particular case, that SME, that helps people or guide people and facilitate the participation. Also, the facilitating community, in that particular case, for example, several city councils that give us some facilities, for example, to show some pictures or have some, dedicated workshops, only, the facilities to change your clothes if you want to go to swimming. And of course, we will have the participatory community, the people, those people that are the ones that participate and help us. And for us, it was really important to have this as a kind of first outcome, because as you can mention, we put that as a kind of subtitle. The participatory guide, it's in a very local language, in Catalan, because many of the people most of them were Catalan speakers, and it's quite difficult to find, scientific outcomes in our local language, and that's why we decided to do it in local language. And we mentioned this idea that this guide was made with and for the people who wants to know the biodiversity of the beaches in Barcelona area. So, and this idea of with and for, it was really important, because as now it's an open, product, you can download from Zenodo, and despite you can see that it's a very local language. Right now we have more than 800 downloaded, which is quite, I think, we were not expecting so many people downloaded that guide, but it was for us particularly important to acknowledge the contributions. You can see in the list, because all the pictures of that guide are made by volunteers. So in some cases, people say, well, maybe there is not high quality, but that's enough, because this helps a lot for the identifying, and the people feel that they are part of that project and of that activity. So this was the first step. So which will be the next one or the following one? This idea, to combine, and this is a component of starting thinking on terms of activism. So by one hand, we have the Minca as this platform that helps and provides the capacity that people can provide their own observations. But then we have the deliberative technologies that provides these open deliberative platforms. So what we are doing now we're merging Minca as a kind of platform for observing with Decidim. Decidim is an open source initiative. It was promoted by the City Council of Barcelona, and the Decidim was, basically designing for this idea of combining or allowing empowering people in many initiatives in terms of citizen consultation, participatory budgeting. You can create debates of assemblies, networking, communication, participative processes, and the idea is to combine now to create these deliberations, but supported. And I'm going back to the first one. The idea of creating better policies, because we try to with these improved observations and improved deliberation, we will have this capacity of, well, we hope to create this idea of creating these policies based on observations, on facts or evidence-based policies, and that's why basically what I would like to explain as a kind of example and how we can transform a little bit the citizen science that in many cases it's just understood, as a collaborative system to help a scientist in many cases on designing or even designing the systems to answer questions, scientific questions. Here we can go one step beyond. So we know that in the particular case, but this can be expandable to any other type of topics. But urban beaches are quite controversial in some cases. For example, in our case, for example, maybe you've heard that there are this idea of expanding the port or the airport, and many people complain, which will be, the consequences on that in the coastal areas, or expanding or increasing the tourism capacity. But we know that maybe we are, over exploiting that. But in some cases, there are some people that they do not believe, as Luigi was mentioned, our society is really diverse, and we can have many opinions on which should be the future of those areas. And we hope that with these tools, at least we can provide better ways, to empower people for reasoning or discussing or deliberating which will be the future of our coast. This is one example that I think we could be expandable to any other or many others. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Jaume. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's great to see as Katerina was telling me before the presentation, to see the sort of the complete ecosystem of a project going from the hands of scientists to the hands of citizens to deliberation on broader civic decision-making. So thank you for that. Let's go now to our last co-speakers, Gianluca, Grimalda, and Laura Horn from Scientist Rebellion. Gianluca is a senior researcher at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. He's a social scientist interested in the psychology and cultural biases of social cohesion. Cultural basis of social cohesion with an application to climate change. He's the coordinating author in the International Panel on Social Progress, the chair and contributor to the Task Force on Social Cohesion in the Think 20 network, which provides policy advice to the G20 annual meeting. And his research has been published in PNAS, Nature Communications, Psychological Science, and Experimental Economics. Laura is a political economist. Her own research focuses on the political economy of European integration. She teaches global political economy, including ecological economics. In her forthcoming co-edited book, she and her collaborators have written Future Histories about Global Politics in the Anthropocene. She is also part of the Scientist Rebellion Nordic. Gianluca and Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this nice introduction. And what Laura and I will try to do in our slot is to give you some impressions, so to give you a brief introduction on Scientist Rebellion, and also to talk about our personal trajectories that have led us to get involved. And so let me put the slides in slideshow, so hopefully you can see them now. And yeah, so that is the title of our introductions, and I think it conveys the idea of at least a part of the role of for scientists in today's world, so to shift from publications to public actions. And probably there is not much need to remind you of how serious the situation of climate change is, but just to be sure that we're all on the same page, and in order to justify the need that many of us feel to get out of our offices and get to the streets and to put not only our articles but also our bodies on the way of supporting positive environmental action. I think this slide says it all. So this slide, even a child could understand that something serious is happening on our global temperatures that are massively on the rise. We know that this is due to the increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And this graph plots the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last 800,000 years. And you can see that there is really something exceptionally going on, starting from the Industrial Revolution. And I think no scientist today would deny that this is man-made. I think it's clear. This is another very, I would say, impactful slide that really justifies the need for action. So this is, again, the chart detailing the increase in temperatures over time, with signposts for every major political international event that should have a curbed emission. And you see basically no impact. I mean, to be precise here, we should really look at the first derivative, because this graph reports a cumulative emission. But even if you look at the change in emissions, nothing really would change. I think it's unfair to say that nothing has happened. I think it's fair to say that climate agreements like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement have had a minor role in decreasing emissions, but that is by far overwhelmingly insufficient to prevent the possible environmental and climate collapse that we might be facing in no longer than 10 years. So you see in the last report of the International Panel on Climate Change, there is this stark prediction that we will exceed almost certainly, unless a miracle happens, we will exceed almost certainly 1.5 increase in temperatures by less than 10 years. And even if there cannot be any certainty on which level of, which threshold of temperature increase is associated with the structural environmental collapse, many scientists would say that 1.5 is a safety level. I mean, some scientists even say that 1.1 was the safety level, and we have already overtaken that. So there is a lot of uncertainty, but there is the awareness that, as United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said repeatedly, we are really facing the possibility of the end of civilization as we have seen it so far. So what are we going to do as scientists and as citizens, just witnessing the collapse of the world, sitting on a chair, or shall we take action? So people who have joined the scientist rebellion believe, so we are a group of scientists, researchers, students, and supporters, so we are open to, end quote, non-scientists. So we believe that it is necessary to act. And we believe that in this particular situation, it's important, it's necessary to take non-violent civil resistance to respond to the urgency of climate emergency. And that is because of the traditional models. I'm not going into that because Luigi had already mentioned some of these aspects before, but the traditional models, you know, that scientists inform policymakers or scientists inform the public and then social change will happen. Basically, we have seen that that is not happening, or at least it's not happening at the change and at the scale required. So here I wanted to give a very, very short introduction into what is civil disobedience. Again, maybe this is totally unnecessary, so forgive me if I'm, you know, just sound like preaching or lecturing, but I think it's important to understand what a civil disobedience is. And according to the definition offered by John Rawls, who is one of the most prominent political philosophers of the 20th century, civil disobedience can be defined as an action that is public, non-violent, conscientious, and it implies a breach of law undertaken with the aim of bringing about a change in law, institutions, practices, or policies. And so let me stress, I think each of these aspects would probably deserve a lecture or maybe a course, but let me just stress some specific aspects. So civil disobedience does imply breaching of the law. And of course, we don't do that because, you know, we like going to the street blocking the traffic. We do that because we believe that the situation is so serious that we really need strong action to launch the alarm, to raise the, to ring the alarm bells that the situation is very bad. And we believe as scientists, we have a high credibility. So scientists are still the public figure with the highest level of trust from the general public. So we believe that the action by scientists is particularly important because precisely because the people from the general public trust what scientists say a lot. So civil disobedience, so if you know, in this chart, in this line, I've put this red line. So that is what is the law tells you what you can do and what you cannot do. So of course, there are a lot of legal protests that will take place within the boundary of the law. Civil disobedience is just a step beyond. So I would say that, I will say a little bit more in a moment, but civil disobedience still works within the general respect for the legal system. So unlike, of course, revolutionary movements or violent protest movements, so civil disobedience acts in the belief that it's possible to reform the system through these means. Then a step beyond that, there will be uncivil disobedience, but yeah, I don't have time to deal with now. So let me stress again some of these principles of civil disobedience. So in particular, the conscientiousness aspect. So I think what is important for civil disobedience is the action for a cause that has relevance for the common good. So John Rawls says that by civil disobedience, we mean actions for causes. So it means really talking to the general sense of justice of the majority of the population and act for causes, for problems that are of general relevance. And let me mention the justifiability. So again, according to these theorizations, civil disobedience is in a way a last resort in the face of a long-standing injustice. And I believe on the basis of what I presented before, we are precisely in this situation. So we are facing a long-standing injustice because we have known for 40 years, and of course, Edson knew it even before. So we have known for nearly 50 years that emitting CO2 is bad. And we are keeping on doing it. And clearly the political authorities are not capable of regulating this. So we are facing long-standing injustice. And we believe this is really a last resort. Although I must also say that personally, I'm also accepting of other actions that I think we really need a different in a way, menu of actions, because, you know, if I have learned one thing as a social psychologist, that the variety and the richness of a human behavior is so broad that one size fits all measures or policies will never work. So you really need different communication strategies and different actions, again, to cater for different people. There are, of course, many examples of civil disobedience in the past that in a way inspired also our group, but I don't have time to deal with them now. Let me just mention the suffragettes, the civil rights movement in the US, the movement Rosa Parks was involved in, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So I think every social scientist would say that the action, the civil disobedience action by these movements was instrumental and probably necessary to achieve social change and political change. And I will now leave the floor to Laura.
Thanks, Gianluca. To follow this up by a bridge into the more concrete question that this webinar talks about, the role of academics and the agency and the different pathways of action that we have, we wanted to also zoom in a little bit on this multifaceted role, following up on the discussion of nonviolent civil disobedience, because of course we all have different rooms for agency, we're all in different contexts, and we have different conditions for agency given the particular structure that we're based in. One of the things that I think that bears highlighting here is that we are also in a very specific social field, namely the university or the research institution that imbues us with the social function of the academic or the scientist. And that's really difficult, really important to keep in mind, because that at the same time enables us towards specific forms of agency, and at the same time it also constrains us. What you find is that more and more scientists nowadays use the social field of the university also to push from within, right? Think about no-fly or reduce flying initiatives. Think about all sorts of sustainability initiatives that universities themselves initiate. Think about ways to bring sustainability concerns, ecological concerns into teaching, into our own practices as academics, and even if it's micro level, you know, how much we print, and so forth and so forth. So there are all sorts of different fields that we really have to think about when we want to consider our roles and when we want to consider the ways that we can act. But all of these different pathways of agency are also characterized by what Katerina already pointed out, the vertical power between scientists themselves, between scientists, the universities, and the public, as well as, you know, the funders and the state and all these different institutions. So there are also distinct consequences of being a climate activist. Gianluca and I will come back to them later on in the slides. But at the same time, we really also, I think all of us called upon to think about what are our own assumptions about doing science and about being academics against the climate and ecological emergency that will basically change the way our societies function. As Charlie Gardner, one of the Scientist Rebellion members from early time onwards, likes to say, there are no professorships on a dead planet. To expect that there will be continued state funding in a welfare state like where I'm in Denmark, that seems insane if we're basically undermining our own livelihood and the very foundations of the welfare state in the next decades to come if we continue like that, right? So these assumptions that we all have, there will be academia, there will be jobs. We might need to question them. Then the question of open science and science communication that we've seen so beautifully from the other two speakers and these kind of citizen science things, I think is really important, because as scientists, we are so used to being in increasingly fenced off bubbles, whereas there's a world out there that is becoming increasingly politicized, that where people don't agree with each other. And in my own field in political economy, there's, you know, a lot of people who have a very hard time to think about social struggles like the yellow vests in France. How do we make sense of them, right? So to be on the street and to be confronted by someone who sometimes even aggressively pushes you away and says, I need to drive through the street, how dare you block it? We've seen that now with the last generation protests and blockades in Berlin. That is something that you don't get as a scientist, right? So that kind of level of communication, also on social media, as well as increasingly the politicization that you get in established media, that is something I think that we as scientists, the moment we step into activism, need to confront, need to navigate, and need to think about. If you just click one slide further. So what happens when we leave our comfort zone of academia? And most of us know academia in itself can be a snake pit, so it's difficult enough to navigate that. The power relations become even more complex the moment we go beyond academia, right? And many of us, this is from one of our protests, one of our actions in Copenhagen, many of us would rather, you know, be teaching our students than, you know, the public at large and politicians and what have you. But there are, of course, multiple pathways, different actions. Gianluca already mentioned the kind of horizontality of lots of non-violent civil disobedience actions. But these all come with very specific contexts where we need to think about, you know, the norms and the opportunities and the boundaries, and frankly also the risks. It's a very different thing to be a climate activist in Denmark or in Germany than it is in, for instance, in Ghana, than it is in various Latin American and Southern American countries, where you basically risk death if you're being too prominent as a climate activist. And then there's this question here I would like to challenge Luigi maybe a little bit about the political dimension of being an activist, because the moment you work together towards this critical mass of agency, you need to throw your hat in with specific groups. That's a function of working together in a critical mass. But who is that? Is that the radical climate movement? Is that Greenpeace? And that really forces you to come off the fence politically. And that's something that we as academics are often not very comfortable in, because we've been conditioned and socialized and trained in exactly maintaining this objective barrier of, you're here, you follow the conventions of your science, then everything will be okay, and you leave the politics to someone else. And that comfort zone, you need to leave that, and that can be very painful, right? So we need to challenge those assumptions about the very role of scientists if we want to get somewhere, because as Gianluca has pointed out, it isn't working.
Okay, we now take over from Laura and talk a little bit more about some of the actions that we have carried out. Only the most recent ones. So if you go to our webpage, you will see a page with all our past actions. And we started very small with basically 1 or 2 people protesting against the Royal Society in England. But then these photos are taken from Glasgow in November, so in the occasion, November last year, so in the occasion of the COP26. We blockaded a bridge for about 5 hours, and that led to probably the first mass arrest of scientists. So 21 scientists and non-scientists were arrested and detained, some of them overnight, and then released with no charge the day after. And we also conducted this, I think this is probably a typical action by scientist rebellion. So we target energy companies or companies that claim that they are on a path of a climate neutrality, and they apply a lot of greenwashing to their industrial strategy. So we go there and we paint pages, we paste pages of the International Panel on Climate Change report on the walls of their headquarters. We glue them to make really the case that we want to occupy the space. In April, in the first week of April, we carried out a global mobilization that involved more than 1,000 scientists and non-scientists from 28 countries around the world. And the first week of April was for us particularly important because it was the week in which the last part of the 6th report of the International Panel on Climate Change was released. And about 1 year earlier, we had leaked the version of the report before the painful action of basically white coating and sugar coating and diminishing the gravity of the situation that policymakers engage with from the original version. So you know that there are about 2,500 instances in which the original report that was written exclusively by scientists have changed in order to mainly to really water down the gravity of the report, mainly for the executive summary that goes to policymakers. So you can see a strong presence in Africa. We were active in 8 countries in Africa. A lot of European countries were involved. These are some of the photos from the actions that we took. Some of them involved targeting parliament and political institutions, as others involved blockading the activity of energy companies. I think we have really, in all cases, stayed within the boundary of civil disobedience, because even this paint that you see on the walls of the Spanish parliament here in the middle was actually washable paint, so it didn't leave any damage at all. So we were respectful of property. So these are some other actions from the US, France, Sweden, Australia. These are some actions from Africa. In particular, let me point out people in Zimbabwe who went to demonstrate in front of illegal mining fields. And that is, I would say, a very dangerous action. So really respect to them. And some other actions from South America. And just a few words, I'm mindful of time, just a few words on my own personal trajectory. So I have been engaged in legal protests for about 20 years. So here you can see a young smiling me involved in actions for social justice movement in England, for Greenpeace in Spain. And then I also engaged into no-fly commitment. So I have a fieldwork as a part of my research in Papua New Guinea, but I'm conscious of the environmental impact. And so I traveled 27,000 kilometers overland in order to avoid catching a plane. And I did that for 4 times. Actually, in my study in Papua New Guinea, part of the topic was climate change. Yeah, so these are some photos from my travel. I also traveled by ferry to reach Colombia. And then eventually in the last year, I actively engaged with the Scientist Rebellion. I took part in truly arrestable actions. So this is from our April mobilization in Italy. So we blockaded the main energy provider on the day, and we also organized a theater act to remark how basically the activity of energy companies are basically funding the war in Ukraine. And this is another action I took part against Deutsche Bank in Germany. So here I think this number in the bottom left-hand corner is very significant. So Deutsche Bank praises itself to be on a climate neutral path, but since the Paris Accord, Deutsche Bank has invested 81 billion euros into fossil projects. So we pasted this number on a chart that purportedly portrayed Deutsche Bank as a good actor. So and then we glued ourselves to the windows of Deutsche Bank, and then we were forcibly removed by the police. And we also organized, some purely informational, I would say, I would call it teaching or share in the street. So we went in front of the United Nations Climate Change Conference to have a day-long series of lectures on climate change, hoping to mobilize policymakers at the conference. And I will leave it to the conclusions to Laura.
Thank you. Just looking at Michael here, 2, 3, 4 more minutes, is that okay? All right. I wanted to use this opportunity to maybe just close our talk a little bit with more ambiguous experiences about being an academic activist. Because there's, of course, a large gray zone and also lots of unknowns for people and lots of, pain thresholds to come into academic activism. So maybe just to give a couple of examples where, things are multifaceted again in our own roles. Here you see a couple of examples from what we in Scientist Rebellion Nordic have done over the last year and a half. Also, we have organized teach-ins outside the climate ministry where, the Danish press was all over us, and I found myself and my face in national news without ever having actually wanted it. So one of the things that comes out is like, there's pictures of me in places that I did not expect. And that is maybe also one of the ambiguities, because as scientists, that's not really, we want our voices and our brains to be represented, not necessarily our faces. I have also had more contact with the police than I would have expected. But of course, that is a function of obviously being, doing non-violent civil disobedience actions. There's a lot of interesting things that happen when you use your role as a scientist. If you look towards the bottom right of this picture here, you see 3 of us, our wonderful rebels, Fernando and Eitzko, were part of this action where the Danish oil and gas industry had a summit, and we registered as scientists with a doctorate in the title, and then they refused us access at the very last moment because they had seen our teach-in, and they literally kicked us off the conference, an open conference where the public was invited. Of course, we went anyway and stood outside in the rain in November in Denmark and held up our little posters and looked like miserable sewer rats. But we also managed to get it into public media that the Danish oil and gas industry was not willing to invite critical scientists. Here I'm holding up a little piece of blue tack, which we would have used to put our posters on the wall. So that was the only thing we were going to do. Anyway, so there's a lot of a lot of, even within sort of narrow boundaries, there's a lot of things that you can do. But again, in particular within the Scandinavian norms, transgressions here occur much earlier than they do, for instance, in Germany, because it's, you know, who are you to do these kind of things? So again, as I promised to share some ambiguities of being a climate activist, Gianluca, if you could just pull up the last slide here. Let me share some of the personal trajectories with you. And they're not quite as heroic as Gianluca's, but they also show the realities of what happens when scientists and academics step over that line, right? You can see here my kids. It's a blurry picture, so I feel comfortable sharing it with you. This is actually very much a real life, them fighting on the sofa. The moment you become a parent, obviously, you know, your academic role and situation also changes, and that makes a difference for, you know, how you see your own perspective and your own trajectory. That is not to say that climate activists are all parents, not at all. We don't care about our own kids only and exclusively. We should be caring about all the kids in the world right now. But it is certainly something that kind of put me along on the trajectory. The Danish media ran a series of things on the front fighters for climate, and they wanted to put me in, and I told them, look, I'm really not. I mean, there's so many people who have been fighting in a micro level and in lots of different, in obscurity for such a long time, and they still wanted to run with me because I'm a scientist. And I find that really problematic. And I'm using my platform to kind of say, look, it's not me you should be featuring. At the same time, I had a journalist putting in a freedom of information request at my university, requesting the last 5 years of my salary data, as well as the last 5 years of my travel data. So all the claims, all the expenses on me. I'm a public employee, so they get to have this data. And then that journalist basically accused me of being a big old hypocrite because I was flying before Corona. And so here is the kind of ambiguity to Gianluca's story, because some of us are climate activists, but still need to fly. Some of us still eat meat. Some of us, you know that story. And the accusations of hypocrisy is something, of course, that's difficult to relate to. And that's something that you will also get from colleagues, you know, how dare you say that thing when you still do X? So navigating this ambiguity between your individual actions, your individual agency, and the structural and the collective is something that you don't get out of as an activist. You don't get out of it as a scientist, right? For me, there's also really interesting and problematic things relating to my own personal situation, coming with a citizenship application in Denmark, which will be suspended if I am arrested and charged. It will literally be suspended and I won't be Danish citizen, right? But that's me being super privileged. I'm on a permanent position and I have a German citizenship that allows me to stay in Denmark. What happens if you're on, you know, a temporary visa? What happens if you don't have a permanent position? So all of these questions of power that we bring with us in our identities, it has been mentioned before, they obviously also feature when we think about activism, and they should feature in our considerations of how far can we go, how far can we push those boundaries that Michael has mentioned before, because we do need our livelihoods and we do need to think about self-care, we do need to think about our collective structures. But I think if I've learned one thing from Scientist Rebellion is that as a scientist, we've been so pushed and socialized into individualism, and Scientist Rebellion really shows you that you're not alone and you don't have to act individually. It's the collective, it's the critical mass that can get us out of this.
Final words? All done?
So
Yes,
yeah, I should have said that. Sorry. That was actually mic drop and then I went to you know.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. Laura put it beautiful. So this is just the page reminding the audience of our contacts if you want to get engaged with the Scientist Rebellion.
Okay, everyone can photograph and screenshot that. And of course, all of these slides will be up through the Web2Learn website and social media accounts as soon as possible. So thank you, Gianluca. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, all of the speakers. Gianluca, if you can stop the screen share, and then we can go back to sort of party mode. And let's get into Q&A. There's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of very knowledgeable, experienced people in the chat. Let's do this for kind of ground rules in question asking. If you have a question, as opposed to just some commentary you're making in chat, type the word question, preferably in all caps, and type your question. And Katerina and I will be, and the participants, you're welcome, speakers, to keep your eye on those as well and sort of raise your hand if there's one you'd like to dig into. I'm going to direct a few questions to get things started. And I think let's start at the kind of the ground level, well or close to the core behavior and accepted practice of academic institutions, or maybe a more, maybe the beginning of a path towards civil disobedience in action. And I want to ask Jaume about your experience working with sort of, I'm going to use finger quotes, normal people. Of course, we know there are no normal people. Everyone is quite extraordinary and fascinating. But in listening to your talk, there's this, I feel the presence of this idea that citizens, normal people, both have the right to participate in these kinds of activities about their environment, their future, their neighborhoods, and they know quite a bit. And also that by participating, by leaning into a civic process, they begin a journey that leads to larger and more impactful things. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your experience with your projects and these individual journeys that people get on when they begin to participate in citizen science and activism.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, basically what I could do, I could mention is in the case that, the example that I put, many people, you know, are learning more and knowing more about what is going on in these ecosystems. And for example, this provide us, you know, at the end, the capacity or the capability to show the rest of the society that, for example, urban beaches are more than just sand and water, and they change their mentality, and in some cases for little things. You know, for example, when we started showing that there are seahorses in that beach, I say, really, there are seahorses? Wow, wow. But then that beaches are important to protect somehow. So somehow, you know, you're transforming the opinion of the people. And this is a very small question. I think it's important for maybe we as a scientist provide maybe better messages, because in some cases people, and I agree with Luigi that in some people say, who cares about that? The example he put, you know, for example, they say, well, if we have, maybe we have hotter summers, but we will have warmer winters. And maybe we need to translate in easy words to say that the Earth is not working like this. You may have maybe hotter summers, but much colder winters at the end, because the system is, technically, the word is said, it's a non-linear system. We need to express this in easy words, to not put, for example, this non-linear system that this creates in some cases, chaotic, you know, behavior or unpredictable behavior. But we know, for example, that there will be stronger storms, stronger events, and those events that are somehow, you know, damaging will be more frequently. And maybe we need to explain in lay words or easy words to say, look, this is the kind of situations we may have. Or for example, this idea that some people believe that, you know, the change will be linear when we have what is called changing phases. So we are in this place and now going here. And when we are here, we will not go like this. Once we have this, we need to go back to return to the place we are comfortable. And this kind of message, which I understand that for some people, it's much easier to explain in technical words, explaining what is this kind of systems. Maybe one of the, as activists, one of the messages is to translate these kind of messages, very technical, to a very easy way to make understandable to the people, which is the really emergency in some cases. And also to contrast, because what is the problem is now in society, there are many people that they do not want to change their way of living because they are rich. I would say the big changes or the most important change in society needs to be done for those people that now they have a lot of richness, global richness. So there will be the major change for them, and they don't want to change, because why do we need to change our style of life if I'm really good? Because honestly, what will happen is that the major consequences of those changes will affect the poor people, and it's complicated. And I put maybe a kind of warm or middle example how to change the coastal use, but I think that maybe we need to explain better which will be the consequences of not changing, and that's why the emergency of doing things right now, and in some cases against the interest of the most powerful people. But maybe
go ahead and finish. Go ahead and finish that thought, Jaume.
That's basically that idea. Yeah, because I know time is going. No, that's fine. Let me leave it like this. Yeah, okay. Maybe we need to improve the message we provide.
Time is the constant, and I think your example of there are seahorses really rings true with me and the work I've done helping communities understand the climate crisis, that almost always the epiphany comes only when there's a change or an idea that's felt personally within people's own near lives. I see Laura nodding up and down. I want to go to a question now from Carolyn in the chat. Question: under what contexts do the acts of civil disobedience that impact the general public, for example, blocking roads, which triggers anger and frustration, how do they improve mass engagement? What authors and labs are looking at this question? I think that's a question for Gianluca and Laura.
Yes, so I think that's a very interesting question, and there is some empirical evidence that shows that indeed non-violent civil disobedience is effective, whether you believe it or not. Actually, there has been a recent study by the Social Change Lab in the UK on the actions by Just Stop Oil. We'll send the reference later on. But they do show, carrying out interviews before, during, and after one of the campaigns by Just Stop Oil, that the attitudes of the people had changed positively in the direction of higher willingness, for instance, to engage, to have a chat with your local politician on climate aspects, and also willingness to take action. I mean, I must say the change was minimal. So the shift was in the region of 3–4% on a scale from 0 to 100. But it was significant. And also on this website, Social Change Lab, there is also an extensive review of empirical evidence showing that indeed these actions have power in shifting political opinion and in bringing people onto climate action.
Thank you. Laura, do you want to add? Laura. Yeah, do you want to add to that, Laura?
I've posted the link to the survey in the chat. The broader question is, of course, a can of worms about your theory of change and your social theory of change, right? And here, there is no clear answer. And to be honest, even in Scientist Rebellion, which is this beautiful ecology of wonderful people coming from different corners and different disciplines and bringing their own assumptions. And it's sometimes in the chat, you wouldn't believe it. But we're all learning from each other. And I think we don't yet have a unified theory of social change. We don't all fully subscribe to the Extinction Rebellion 3.5 discussion. We're not all anarchists. Some of us are Marxists, right? And the anarchists and the Marxists don't always get along in how we think the revolution or interstitial change is going to come about. So in a way, we are sometimes grasping in the dark, but we would rather grasp in the dark than sit on our hands, if you want to use that analogy, I think.
Well, well said. I'm going to go to another question from Audrey in the chat. Question: how to engage politicians and governments to work and vote laws to significantly change our societies and prevent us from reaching the catastrophe we are headed to? So the question is, how do we drive political change? Not a simple question at all. Gianluca or Laura, both either one of you want to dive into that? Or if I may cast it another way, how to get past the doubt that many individuals feel that there is no way to create political change?
Yeah, so I would say that's really the $1 billion question. I think I'm honest. I don't think I can say that I have an answer. What I can say is that we must try hard, and we must try probably in different ways. So civil disobedience is one. I think, again, I mean, I don't want to sound overly scientific in a way, but I'm an empirical scientist. So there is an empirical evidence that civil disobedience is effective and is more effective than violent resistance. So I would say there is a philosophical argument in favor of non-violence, but there is also, if you like, a tactical argument, because in the history of social movements, we have seen that movements that have embraced the violence have kind of fizzled out and have lost the support, the popular support. So personally, I believe that, yeah, we are way behind schedule, so it's probably too late to stay within safety boundaries. But I think that as soon as people realize that these extreme weather events are not an emergency, are not a new normal, but they will become worse and worse, then we'll see much more political demand by the general public, and even with our corrupt political institutions, so politicians will have to listen. In these very days, I have read news of riots in Sri Lanka that have been massively hit by rising prices. And poor people who are really literally starving to death have targeted rich people, and there have been 200 people dying. So this is, I think, a first instance of societal collapse. And we are going, I'm certain that we are going to see more redistribution, because we know that rich people are most responsible for emissions. And I think, as I said before, as long as extreme weather events will become more frequent, and they will, then we'll also witness significant political change. It will probably be too late to stay within safety boundaries, but I think something must happen.
Okay. I think yes, actually, and hold on one second, Luigi. So in the closing, I wish we could go on for another, hours here with you all. Let me give each of you literally 60 seconds on the mic. The question I propose to you, but you can use the time any way you want, is we have 80, 90 people in the room here. A piece of advice you would give them of something they can do tomorrow to constructively begin working towards the vision that you all have advocated today. So that's my easy question, but feel free to use this minute any way you want. And let's start with Jaume, and then Luigi, and then Gianluca, and then Laura, you'll close. A minute each. The floor is yours, Jaume.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, but basically my 30 seconds or minute, I think that we are in a hurry. We need to be activists, and I engage, and I offer my help as a scientist in collaborating any actions you would like to have in massive actions, because I fully agree with Luigi that we need to coordinate somehow. That's very important to get that critical mass.
Thank you. Luigi.
Yes, well, at the risk of being heavily criticized, I wanted to say that, well, people should read the book Factfulness. I write the name of the book the chat. I disagree that we are going toward the catastrophe. So that's I think that why I think that the previous questions is debatable. Just a couple of examples. My life in Europe, I lived between Italy, Spain, and the UK, has been, let's say, improving as quality of life. My surrounding in the UK is improving. In Tanzania, where I'm at the moment, Tanzania has recently passed from a poor country, let's say a low-income country, to a middle-income country. This happened recently. So let's say the conditions in Tanzania are improving drastically. I mean, they really are changing the condition towards the better. So we need to be careful when we say that we are going toward the catastrophe, because many parts of the world are improving. And I think that the book Factfulness, which is a very famous and strongly based book, will give a good glimpse on the real state of the world. Thanks.
Okay, super. And that's Factfulness? That's Hans Rosling?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, super. Gianluca.
Yes, I would like to share Luigi's optimism, but I'm in northern Italy now, and we are facing a terrible drought with the main river 3 meters below the normal level, the main Italian river, the Po. Of course, we cannot say that the climate change is the cause, but we know that climate change increases the likelihood of these high probability events. But thank you for the book suggestion, Luigi. I will read the book. In terms of what people can do tomorrow, as I have read some interesting comments in the chat, and I'm aware that I'm absolutely privileged. I have a job, I have a long-term contract. Hopefully I will not be fired for my actions from my institute. I think nobody will have to pretend other people to engage in very impactful actions if they don't feel to. So I think everyone should do the most they could compatible with their own values, with their personal circumstances, and with their personal beliefs. So I'm not going to, preach out in terms of you should also come and blockade energy companies if you don't feel like it. But of course, you're very welcome if you want to do it. And I would say I share this aspect of that Luigi said. It's important to create a critical mass. I do believe that individual action is important, because without individual action, there isn't even a critical mass of people. So I would say something that you can easily do is to give up on meat, for instance, take public transport rather than taking a car, and inform other people of what you are doing and why you are doing it, and try to join movements of fellow-minded people. So that's my advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Gianluca. Laura, the final words are yours.
Thank you. Maybe to nuance this discussion between the optimism and the catastrophe is already happening for people. It is already happening as we speak. They're already dying, right? At the same time, it doesn't have to be like that. It is not too late. No one is saying it's too late, and every fraction of a degree matters, and we can do something about it, right? So if we hold on to that, I think that gives us space to act, space for agency, and maybe to bring this discussion of, where are concrete things and actions you can do tomorrow. You can start today. What you really want to start with today is see yourself within a larger web of life. See yourself as someone who is embedded in relations that can be, your partner, your children. It can be your cat, it can be the tree outside your house. It can be, the little seahorse in Barcelona that mobilizes you to think about yourself as not just this atomized human being, but someone who is embedded in the wider social reproduction processes, and nature is part of that, our planet is part of that. So just sit yourself down and think about how do I want to live? How do I want to live with others and for others? And out of that, you will realize all the different possibilities of action that people have pointed out here, the critical mass, thinking about, how we consume, but it really starts with the realization of who is that person who can do things, and how are you not on your own? You're not really only an individual. You're always embedded in these social processes, and that can be really powerful without, the kind of new agey kind of thing. It's a political fact, and it's the first thing to think about when you want to change things.
Very well said. And I'll say, to add my own two pieces in my mind listening to you all today, I'm reminded of a study I read that over 90% of people who begin volunteering for a cause, begin giving their own time, become socially active, do so because someone they know and trust asked them to. So this is something very simple that we can all do if you're involved in these movements or these ideas. Ask someone to come along with you on the journey. And finally, I was reading Auden Chandler's book, Getting Green Done, and he recounts an expression from a friend of his that if you're looking at the climate science data and you're not pessimistic, you need to look at better data. But then also, if you meet the people who are like you, involved in confronting the problem and working together, it's hard not to be optimistic. So and on behalf of Katerina, I think we're all very optimistic and challenged by what I feel I've heard from you all today. Katerina will post the chat and the videos from today's talks. The chat is very rich. Please take a chance now to download it before you sign out. If you want to say a last word as you exit today's meeting, please do so. And Katerina, is there anything else I'm forgetting to mention before I say thank you to everyone for coming? Thank you especially to our speakers who have dialed in from the far reaches of the globe today. Katerina?
Indeed, thank you very much for the speakers, for the very active chat. There will be a follow-up event in the form of a workshop, because that was a webinar, that was the start of a process. It will be organized by late August, and we'll be very happy to share the recording, the slides, and the date of this online webinar, and we wait for you to meet you again. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Ciao.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Travel safely, Luigi. Goodbye, Luigi. Thanks for joining.